Here we want to think about competitive forces in the correct context when we think about market power. When we draw a supply and demand diagram to represent markets, the market sets the prices, not individual sellers. A seller who sets a price higher than the market price would be unable to sell anything. This is a good description of some markets, but in others, there are a few firms, and each seems to set its own price. Many people see markets with very few firms, each setting their own prices, as being less competitive. With fewer firms, we're not living up to the perfect competition model's requirement or assumption of many firms, many small firms competing. So we see just a few firms as being less competitive then. Right? So just a few firms is less competitive than markets with many firms who accept whatever the price is and are this clear kind of price taker perfect competition model situation. Are markets with few firms necessarily less competitive? Well, no. Right? We can have very few competitors. We can reduce the number of competitors greatly and end up with just as much competition. Think of presidential elections. In an average election, if in the United States, if you drop out the Green Party and the Libertarians, right? If we just had these four major parties competing, the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and Green Party, and we drop out two of those four competitors, does that race really get less competitive? Right? So if we sit there and we say, okay, no longer do we have to worry at all about the Green Party or the Libertarians. Did we reduce the competition because we cut the number of competitors in half and we reduced it down to just two competitors? Is it still competitive with just two competitors? Sure it is. Consider a market with just two sellers. The firm that sets the lowest price, we could assume, gets the whole market. If their prices are equal, then what do? They set the lowest possible price that either firm could produce at, and they split the market 50-50. Suppose you're one of these firms. What's your best response to your competitor's offered price? What is their best response to your offered price? It's to always undercut. So even though there's only two firms there, if we have these simple assumptions of, whoa, if you set a lower price, you're going to be the one capturing the market, well, then what happens? That price still gets driven down. We can have fierce competition just among two competitors. So long as the two firms are competing, this two-firm market, where firms set their prices, is just as competitive as if there were thousands of firms taking the market price. What if one firm has lower costs than the others? Well, then you get a monopoly that almost acts competitively. Why? Potential competition. Think of this concept of limit pricing, right? Limit pricing is when the lowest cost firm sets its price just below the cost of the second lowest firm, right? The second lowest cost firm. Well, what would happen then is we would be driven down in our competition between two firms to just below the higher cost producing firm's lowest cost. Right? So what would happen is, say I can produce at $60 a unit. That's the lowest I can do it at. And I'm competing with you. And you can produce at $55 per unit at your lowest possible cost. Now, while we are competing with one another, we could say that your monopoly price could be $75. So do you go out and charge your monopoly price? No, because if you charge your monopoly price, I'm going to undercut you. I can charge $60 per unit. And so I would undercut you. But you can do it even better than me. And thanks to limit pricing, what you're going to do is you're the lowest cost firm. You're going to set your price just below the costs of the second lowest cost firm, me. So you're going to set your price at something like $59 instead of the $60, which is my minimum. So while we don't get the results of it being driven all the way down to the lowest possible cost of production, the $55 that you can produce at, we get kind of close. And we don't allow you to be a complete monopoly producer, even though you're the only firm in the market. you don't get to charge your $75 monopoly price. Why? You have to be wary of me swooping in and stealing the market from you. So this idea of competition between just two firms can take advantage of this concept of limit pricing or of this idea of potential competition. While there may be only a few or even one firm in a market, real-world companies have to always be on the lookout for potential competition or fierce competition between just a few individuals, right? We don't have to just think of there has to be millions of firms and that's the only way we get semi-efficient outcomes. It could be that only one firm remains, but they're worried about the potential competition of millions or of just a few, right? So we have to have competition in terms of the actual market outcome in the proper context to think about the competitive forces that actually exist within a market.